Hey YouTube, have you ever heard the saying, find a job you enjoy and you never have to work a day in your life? Well, if so, chances are that like me you thought to yourself, that's way too good to be true, and even if, how am I supposed to find a job like that? I'm just some guy in a room with a camera trying to make a YouTube video, but having to do it 10 times over because there's always something that I just don't like and I have to start over. In any case, I actually found a study that statistically proves this saying to be true, and it inspired me to make a video like this, where I take you through 4 steps with which you can find a job like that, no matter who you are, and more generally, how you can maximize your odds of success by setting yourself goals that motivate you the most. Okay, this may sound a bit fluffy and a bit vague, but don't worry, I'm gonna make it as concise and useful as possible. Okay, so these are the 4 steps that I'm gonna go over in this video. We're gonna start by listing the goals. Well, you're gonna do that. I'm just gonna show you some tips and tricks. I don't know you, sadly, so I can't do this for you, but we're then gonna list the sources of motivations that are tied to these goals. And that's the important step of this video, I would say, because that's where we're gonna use the study that I mentioned before. The study is gonna help us find out which ones of these are actually just distractions and which ones have the highest odds of success and which ones are the ultimate goals that sort of motivate the other goals. Then in step 3, we're going to structure the objectives so that in step 4, we can find out what's this next step that we need to do in order to maximize our potential. The hardest thing I would say is step 1. The rest is actually not that difficult. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. We're gonna start with the first step, obviously, but it's a bit difficult for me to, as I said, specify what your goals are because unfortunately I don't know you. Every one of you has different tastes, preferences, strengths, weaknesses, and so on, and it makes it a bit difficult for me to unfortunately give you solid advice here, but there are fortunately many frameworks which you can use to streamline this process and make it more efficient and effective. However, these are not necessary. I'm thinking if you already have a good idea of your goals, you don't need to watch this part. You can skip it to the most important part, which is step 2. But if you want, I'll go over the SWOT framework and then the what's called the Ikigai, which is a framework from Japan, which Ikigai means a reason for being. These can be an inspiration to anybody who doesn't really know what sort of goals they should set for themselves. And here's how it works. In SWOT, you have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, SWOT. This makes up the 4 quadrants. So here's how it looks. We have external versus internal on the y-axis, helpful versus harmful on the x-axis. You have much more control over your internal than your external environment. That's why your goals should aim to maximize your strengths, minimize your weaknesses, so that you're best prepared to take advantage of opportunities that exist or will exist, and you're best able to mitigate threats. Sometimes you can't avoid these, but you can reduce the impact that these will have or just completely avoid them in some cases. I can give you an example with how I decided that I should pursue a YouTube channel as a goal. Alright, so I basically found out some of my strengths and weaknesses, obviously through reflection, but also through Principles You by Ray Dalio, which is free and highly recommendable. However, you should take the characterization that you get with a grain of salt. It can vary by, time of day, time of year. Maybe you just got off a vacation. Maybe you just worked your butt off for an exam, making your mood very different. So do take it with a grain of salt if you decide to test it. But yeah, so it showed me some strengths and it showed me some opportunities, I guess you could say. As a growth seeker, which I agree that I am, I have a passion for the learning and developing myself and sharing what I learn. However, I have certain needs in terms of fulfilling this passion, getting feedback, being able to reflect, being able to improve myself. But enough about me, let's get to Ikigai. Okay, so this is how it looks. It's a Venn diagram of 4 types of activities. Activities that you love, activities that the world needs, activities you can get paid for, and activities that you're good at. And then you have the intersections. And the ideal activity, which you should aim your goals at, would be in the intersection of all of these. So obviously, if you're already good at something, without even having worked hard to be good at it, most people are also good at this. And that's why it's probably not something that the world needs. And that's why it's also probably not something you can get paid for very easily. So when you first look at this, you probably think to yourself, okay, this is quite demotivating. There's no real activity I can think of that is at the intersection of all of these. But don't get discouraged because it's completely normal, you know. Rome wasn't built in one day. We all start from something that we love and that we are maybe good at, or maybe we think we're good at, and then we work our way inwards, or we start at something that we don't really love and we work ourselves inwards. But the study that I'm going to show you in a minute explains that in terms of maximizing your motivation, it's better to choose an activity that you love compared to one where you're simply motivated by what's called extrinsic motivation. So, for instance, money, simply because your odds of burning out are much higher with these sorts of activities, and your performance actually is enhanced a lot more if it's an activity that you actually enjoy or one that you at least are in alignment with in terms of the values. So do keep that in mind when you make goals for yourself. All right, so if you still are a bit unsure about how to find more goals to put on your list, I have one final tip, which is you can get together with a friend or two and ask each other about the strengths or weaknesses that you see in each other. Obviously, you should try to really make sure that you know this person and that they know you, and that they're not being too nice to you so that you don't get misled. But yeah, so that's it for step number 1. The end product could look something like this, where you just simply have a completely neutral list and yet no structure, and it might be a bit crowded and therefore overwhelming. But don't you worry, we're gonna get to step 2 now. All right, we finally got to step 2, and this is the by far most important step in my opinion, because you know a lot of people have a list of goals, but there's a reason why they never get to actually completing it. So here in this step, we want to find 1 or 2 ultimate goals, and we want to eliminate the distractions. But how do you know which ones to focus on? So this is finally where the study comes in that I mentioned all the way in the beginning. I'm just gonna go right into the juicy part of it, which is here. It's tested different types of motivations and found that they vary in their degree of effectivity, and also which ones are more likely to lead to burnout, which is related, obviously. It sets up this sort of spectrum from a motivation to intrinsic motivation, and extrinsic motivation is sort of in the middle. Intrinsic motivation has been found to have the highest positive impact on performance, engagement, satisfaction, and the lowest impact on stress and burnout and so on. And the opposite goes for amotivation, obviously, which is just when you have absolutely zero motivation. Think of it like a slave, for example. They get paid nothing, they have absolutely zero rewards, but they're just working, working, working for nothing in the end. Except maybe that they're forced. Bad example, probably not too fun, I'm sorry. But actually, one that's not that much far off of that is one that's solely based on financial rewards, where you have no fulfillment out of the job. You absolutely hate working there. You don't agree with the values. It doesn't even boost your ego. It doesn't even make you feel good about in any sort of way. You just get paid. That one purely relies on what's called external motivation, and that's found to be quite weak. And this is among the reasons why more and more employees are finding out that if they want to motivate their workers, actually giving them something that they enjoy. So, for instance, a pizza or time off motivates employees more than giving them extra money. Depends, of course, on what they're already getting paid, but you get what I'm getting to. This graph actually highlights the idea that I was just telling you about. You have a divergence from desirable to undesirable outcomes, from amotivation to intrinsic over the different types of motivations, where desirable outcomes include effective commitment, normative commitment, engagement, job satisfaction, performance, productivity, and so on. Normative commitment meaning that you are respecting the rules and the culture and so on. Undesirable outcomes include absenteeism, burnout, continuance, commitment, distress, turnover intention. Basically, the idea is just that your motivation is much stronger with intrinsic than external motivation, and there is a certain hierarchy of motivations, some that are just more effective than others, objectively speaking, and this can guide our goal setting if we want to maximize the odds of our success. And I'm gonna briefly explain these different types of motivations just so you have an idea of which ones are better than others. Of course, it always depends on the setting, so do keep in mind that the study found that in a employee setting, intrinsic motivation has been found to be the most effective, whereas in a civilized setting, which is outside of your career, identified regulation is more powerful. And the reason for this is gonna be obvious when I explain to you what these different types of motivations are. I'm gonna try not to make this feel like a school lesson, but it's just very important to be able to understand these 4 types of motivations and what the difference between them is if you actually want to use any of the stuff that I have in this video. Obviously, a motivation is not on here. It's simply the absence of motivation. Intrinsic motivation is the strongest one. It's doing something because we get direct emotional satisfaction or pleasure out of the activity. I would say it's probably also the rarest one in terms of things that you can get paid for. Smoking, for example, brings you intrinsic motivation, and that's probably why it's so difficult to stop in general with addictions, is that the intrinsic motivation is so strong to keep going. Next up is identification. It's doing something because it appeals to our values and goals. Then we have introjection. It's doing something to preserve our ego and self-image. I would say Donald Trump, when he reacted to Barack Obama grilling him on stage by running for president, he was strongly motivated by introjection to run for president. I would say, my personal opinion, don't grill me in the comments, please. I don't want to have to run for president. But external regulation is the worst one. It's doing something simply to be able to get external rewards, such as money or not punishment. So now you have a vague idea of what the difference between this is, hopefully. Just know that intrinsic is best for job motivation, and if it's outside of the job, then identification is better. However, yeah, it's easier said than done, as I touched on. Alright, now it should make more sense what I'm trying to say when I say that we should eliminate the goals that are just distractions. It's the goals that anyways are not going to lead us to any sort of fulfillment. They are there just because we want to make somebody else happy, or maybe because we believe that this is what will make us happy. But in reality, it's very unlikely that, for instance, if you're purely driven by the incentive to make money and that incentive does not have another incentive tied to it, such as that you want to buy a house and start a family, if it's just money for the sake of money, then trust me, you're going to burn out faster than you know, and you're probably going to have to start over somewhere else, and you're going to end up wasting a lot of your time. But I don't want to tell you what to do. I'm not here to preach anything. I'm just a 25-year-old guy in a room trying to make a YouTube video, as I said in the beginning of the video. I'm just saying this is basically the key idea of this study. Okay, so we should now have a better idea of which goals are distractions and which ones are not. Out of the ones that are left, we should find out which one is our ultimate fundamental objective. Do note that you can have several. It's just easier for the sake of demonstration to have one. This fundamental objective is typically a very broad, long-term objective. This objective in turn motivates specified fundamental objectives, and these in turn motivate instrumental objectives. Okay, so what I mean by this is you have the ultimate fundamental objectives, right? These take a long time to reach, usually. They're quite utopic and visionary, and rarely you will achieve them to the point that you would like to. They're also not very measurable. And as you move down this graph that I showed you before, you become more specific and more short term, and then it becomes more actionable. So think of the ultimate fundamental objective as an example. You see yourself in 10 years as having a family. This means probably you need a house. This means probably you need to have a job that can earn you a living with which you can afford a house. Or maybe you would like to start a business. Maybe you want to tackle a specific problem in this world, or maybe it's something completely different. For this, you need a specified goal that is appropriate. So let's say if you want to have a business, what sort of resources do you need to have saved up? What sort of abilities, skill sets do you need to have acquired? And what sort of network do you need? Okay, now you have this. What sort of instrumental objectives are needed for, let's say, your resources? Maybe you need to save up $500,000 US. This means, okay, one instrumental objective could be to earn $1,000 a week and save it and put it away. Another instrumental objective could be to read about a certain topic that you want to get good at that relates to this business. Improve your skill set week by week. Once you have these kinds of questions that relate to achieving your vision, all you need to do is get started. Really, that's all it is. So what's your first step? Obviously, besides subscribing, well, I guess you have to find out yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was useful, and I wish you great success.